You want to do like one huge round of applause to just get this thing going? And right, that sounds great. Let us welcome our next storyteller to the stage, Patrick Cleary.
My grandfather was a very slow man. He moved very slowly, he talked very slowly. He probably would have worked very slowly if he ever had a full-time job. But as my grandmother was fond of saying, I didn't marry Walter for his earning potential. Which is a pretty saucy thing for a woman who wore these patterned house dresses, white gym socks, and Keds every day of the 1970s and 1980s. Walter didn't really work all that much, but when he did work, he always had very interesting jobs. My favorite was when he would take his grandchildren one at a time in his little Renault, which we thought was super fancy because it had these little straps instead of door handles because it was French. And we would go around town, we'd go into Boston and come back and deliver false teeth to all of the dentists in the North Metro area. It was so cool. But he never had what I would consider a real job. He did things here and there, and he was just the total opposite of my grandmother. Now, my grandmother was a very fast woman. She just could go from one place to another within the span of seconds. If you went to dinner at her house, you would be well fed, but if you put your fork down, you were done. She would take your plate and go to the sink, and if you said, hey, I'm not finished, she'd say, you are now, and then we'd be done. At Christmas time, and this is really no joke, she would get bored with wrapping presents, so we would each get one wrapped present and then a giant contractor bag filled with the most random selection of stuff she could find at the PX. So you'd get like socks and an electric shaver and then just whatever she had found. And if you stayed at Christmas too long, she made you take the ornaments off the tree and shove them out her third floor apartment window, the tree, not the ornaments, down to the ground below. Now, my grandmother owned that apartment building. She, I guess, knew that marrying Walter was not a winning proposition financially, so she was a landlady, and she kept track of all of the residents in her house. And she and my grandfather never really seemed to get along. Well, they didn't. It's not like they didn't get along. It's like they didn't even know each other all that well. He always had his own room, which was interesting in a two-bedroom apartment because they had it their entire marriage and they had 3 children. And we never saw pictures of them together. Even their wedding photo, we had one beautiful photo of my grandmother. She was resplendent in this lace dress with this beautiful heart-shaped bouquet, but Walter was nowhere to be found in that picture. So a lot of people were just like, whatever attracted him to her? She was always busy doing many, many things, and he was just basically making his way down the stairs only to turn around and make his way all the way back up again. Now, the people in my family, at least that side of the family, don't last very long. Walter only lasted until his late 60s, and Grammy only lasted until her mid-70s. And of the 3 children, only 2 of them survived into their 30s. My Uncle Jim, who I am named after, was in a terrible car crash in his 20s. I'm named after him. He was James Patrick. I'm Patrick James. And when he died, he had either a girlfriend or a wife, my grandmother never really told us which, who was pregnant with his kid, who then didn't speak with the family afterwards. And knowing my grandparents, that was probably a good decision, but we always wondered about that cousin. So when my cousin Beth, one of very few cousins on that side of the family, got married, she decided to honor my grandparents by replicating my grandmother's beautiful heart-shaped bouquet. She had it remade. It was all of these white roses, and it was just gorgeous, gigantic, with these beautiful streamers coming off of it. And there was only one relative from that side of the family who had ever seen it. And so she went up and she said, Arenda, did you notice my bouquet? And she said, yes, it's absolutely beautiful. And she said, well, it was Nettie's. And she said, Nettie's? And she said, yeah, from the picture from her wedding to Papa. And my Aunt Edna said, oh, Beth, no. You see, that picture was taken in a studio, and that was a prop. Your grandmother had that portrait taken well before her wedding, and in fact, that wasn't even her wedding to Walter, that was to her first husband. So, out of the entire Cleary side of the family, none of us knew this. So we asked her what had happened, and she said, when your grandmother first got married to her first husband, a few days after they were married, she found out that he could not have children. So being the very fast woman that she was, she booked her way down to the church, and she got a priest, and she got it annulled because that wouldn't do. And she found Walter. So we just thought, oh, that's interesting that she would immediately marry somebody else, assuming that he could have children. And that's what we assumed for a very long time until Ancestry.com came along. And we were looking for our cousin, the one that had been missing because my Uncle Jimmy had died. We found somebody who was related on the cousin level, or maybe an aunt. And she, unfortunately, was a little bit older than my dad, who's the oldest member of the family, but looked exactly like my dad and my Aunt Sue and my Uncle Jimmy. And she had been adopted in the town where my grandfather Walter had grown up. So while we found out that Graham absolutely was very good at knowing what to do, how quickly to do it, and getting things done, we also knew that while Walter never really had a real job, he did have a job that was very useful to my grandmother. Thank you very much.